Author, columnist, managing editor of LibertyNation.com, podcast host and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
What legacy will President Joe Biden leave behind? And can America survive another 4 years of Bidenomics? Well, that's what we'll be looking into in today's edition of Liberty Nation Radio right here on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. We'll be speaking to one of America's best thinkers, Bill Walton, on the state of American politics and the economy, and a whole lot more besides. It's going to be quite the show. Remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. Presidents are all too often concerned with legacies, whether this is in the form of a presidential library or lasting economic and cultural changes. The commander-in-chief is determined to have something positive in the pages of the history books. But what of President Joe Biden, the one-time unity candidate? Now, there's a question not frequently asked just 18 months into a White House occupation. We're fortunate to be joined today by someone who's always delivered a unique and respected opinion on such matters, a giant in the field of money, culture, politics, and human flourishing. Mr. Bill Walton, host of the fantastic Bill Walton Show. Thank you for taking the time to join us, Bill.
Mark, great talking with you.
Now, let's start with the economics angle, if I may. How do you think things are going presently? And further removed from the moment, do you think the Biden administration will be able to claim any successes looking back?
Well, if his idea of success is wrecking the United States economy, I think he's been very successful.
That's pretty much the metric everybody's basing it on.
We now have inflation approaching 10% annually, and most people think it's much higher. But gas prices are twice what they were when he took office. We've got him over in Saudi Arabia right now, hat in hand, although I saw a mocked-up photograph with gas can in hand begging the Saudis for oil. He's put the United States in a position that we were not in 18 months ago. And, I think when he starts thinking about legacy, he's 18 months into a 4-year term, and I don't see any signs that he's going to get this turned around because, he's a true believer. I think we forget that Joe Biden ran on getting rid of fossil fuels, eliminating fossil fuels, and we thought he was joking. We thought he was playing to his base. Well, it turns out he wasn't, and what he's done so far has been very, very successful by his own standards, and but not by most of the rest of us.
It does seem a bit of a conundrum that fossil fuels from Saudi Arabia good, fossil fuels drilled back home bad.
Well, of course it is. And, Trump made the United States energy independent. In fact, we became a net exporter, and that's a great place to be when you realize that fossil fuels provide 80% of the energy the world uses and is really the basis for a civilization. Now, is it a good idea over time to morph into something like wind and solar? Maybe. Depends on who you ask. But we can't get there in 2 years. We can't get there in 10 years. We can't get there in 30 years. So we've got to be smarter about this. And in fact, they've been quite dumb.
It certainly seems so. And what we have with that, I think, is there's a certain ascendancy of other nations in terms of economic growth. And I guess more specifically, the ability to produce things that America seems either unwilling or unable under the present government to actually do. Is there room, do you think, for a United States that prides itself on manufacturing in the future? Or like oil and gas, is this set to be a very foreign affair?
Well, we're paying the price for a foreign policy consensus that started 30 years ago or more when we wanted to bring China into the world trade system. And the theory was we'll make China more prosperous, and therefore they will become more democratic, and therefore they'll become more like us, and we'll have a great world. Well, it didn't exactly happen that way. People forgot to check in with the Chinese Communist Party, who had other plans. Deng, who was president in 1992, now it's known, was whispering to people, we have a let's see, a bide and abide strategy, which is what they're going to be doing is developing their manufacturing capability to the point where they dominate world manufacturers, and then when they succeed, they can reclaim their rightful place in the world. Remember, China is a thousands of year old civilization, and they see themselves as the pinnacle of civilization, not us. So we find ourselves now where the United States is completely dependent upon China for pharmaceuticals manufacturing, from a lot of the microprocessing pieces. Of course, apples are almost entirely manufactured or fabricated in China. For Apple, China's it's one of its largest customers, about 20-25% of the iPhone market. And so this this problem didn't start with Biden. He certainly exacerbated it, but America needs to be thinking very much about getting control of our own manufacturers again, so we're truly independent.
Is that even possible, do you think, Bill? Bear in mind that I think you mentioned on a recent show on the Bill Walton Show that at the moment America doesn't even produce aspirin. Is it possible to revamp American industrialism?
Well, with America, if we have political will, if we have consensus, we can begin to move in that direction. It's unbelievably complicated now, though, because we've been working on interconnecting our supply chains for 10, 15, 20 years. And so, as you point out, something as simple as aspirin, including also antibiotics, the pharmaceutical companies have outsourced that manufacturing to China. Bringing it back here will take decades, really, I think, if you want to do it comprehensively. And that's just one piece of our manufacturing conundrum. But there are a lot of companies who are recognizing that China is no longer an economic competitor. China seems to have declared itself an outright enemy. And so they're doing their planning. We're thinking about factories here, but it will take a decade or two if we really want to achieve anything that approximates economic independence.
So, sorry to carry on down the same path here, because I think energy independence is key to everything. And as you rightly point out, for at least several months of Trump's last proper year in office, the United States was energy independence, and that was a trend that was improving at the time until Joe Biden's fateful promise to end fossil fuels.
The energy piece is the easiest piece for us, I believe. I mean, we can do some simple things like turn back on the gas pipelines, reopening federal lands for drilling, setting up, turning a green light on for regulations so people can frack and produce the energy that we're capable of producing. And so we could actually turn that one around, I think, within a year or two. But we've got to have the political will to do it. And right here in D.C., the federal government headquarters here, the mayor, the city council in D.C. just banned natural gas. That's a good idea.
Allegedly.
As Wayne would say, not.
Yeah.
So we've got a lot of stupidity among the political class, but the energy piece, I believe, is by far the easiest one to turn around, and as you pointed out, the most important.
So with the manufacturing, I guess that would require, as you point out, a steady, dedicated effort to bring manufacturing back to the United States. But that would require some continuity of vision within government, wouldn't it? And that seems very unlikely to happen, especially with how polarized the vision for the future of America is between the two parties.
Well, it's not only government, but I think we have to have a consensus with my friends on Wall Street and the CEOs of the large multinational companies based here in the U.S. I mean, for decades now, they've been assiduously moving manufacturing offshore to bring about lower prices, among other reasons. And they've got to start thinking in terms of an America First strategy, but most of them, unfortunately, have moved into the world of the Davos elites, and they don't necessarily see themselves as Americans first. They see themselves as part of the global economic elite. we've got some work to do. We've got to start, that's part of the reason you and I are talking, is I think we need to have everybody thinking about getting American headquartered companies thinking about our strategic interests first. We saw this with the lockdowns, or when the pandemic, the virus broke out in February, March of 2020. We found ourselves dependent on the Chinese for aspirin, antibiotics. We talked about it, but there was an open debate in China about whether they wanted to sell it to us. So anybody paying attention to that realizes how vulnerable we are. So I think we need to start working on a consensus that particularly for essential things like that, we need to bring it back, and we need to put pressure on these CEOs of these big companies to do just that.
We're talking with Bill Walton on the Biden legacy and the state of America. We'll be right back after this short break, talking the death of political compromise. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And we're back talking with Bill Walton, host of the excellent Bill Walton Show, discussing all things economic and the future of American politics. I wanted to get your thoughts on the nature of compromise in Washington at the moment. So we had Joe Biden come into office saying that he was going to be the unity president. And he has achieved a few pieces of legislation in terms of more popular things that go across the aisle: veteran affairs, aid to Ukraine. Aside from those, there doesn't appear to be any real cross-party unity. And in many cases, not even unity among congressional Democrats. Is the age of compromise dead and buried?
Well, quick story. As you mentioned, I've got a webcast called The Bill Walton Show, and I started it up a few years ago, and my original name for it was On Common Ground with Bill Walton. Now it's called The Bill Walton Show. Why the change? Well, I couldn't really find any common ground.
I believe one of your first guests was a mayor.
Yeah, the mayor of Little Washington, Virginia. Yeah. And he's a good guy, liberal, progressive Democrat. We still like each other, but we found some common ground, but that was increasingly hard to find. You know, you think about compromise. Look at what's happening with the January 6th committee here. This kangaroo court, this star chamber run by Pelosi Democrats in the House. You can't have compromise. You can't have a political climate where people want to work together if you've got something like January 6th happening, which is determined to put most of the people who work for Donald Trump in jail and making sure that Donald Trump never comes back as president. I mean, it's a 100% partisan operation. Pelosi refused to put anybody who is a real Republican on the committee. Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger don't count.
Certainly not. No.
that's but a big example, and you really haven't found any compromise on these big bills that have been passed. They've been passed with highly partisan majorities and nary a Republican vote for most of them.
Yeah, I think that that partisanship, we're seeing that in all branches. Obviously, Joe Biden's only willing to go his way. The Congress is only willing to go its way. And the Supreme Court, which I think many of our listeners are quite thrilled about the more recent makeup of the Supreme Court. And this has, I think, really naturally sparked a national conversation on what rights are. But I wonder if we take a small time slot of Joe Biden in the White House. In your opinion, have rights expanded in America or contracted, and how so?
Well, if you want to use the last 18 months as the timeline,
my next question is about longer timeline.
Yeah, well,
you can answer them both together. Bill.
I don't know that they were highly contracted even under President Trump when we had all the states engaging in lockdowns and declaring some businesses essential and others non-essential, which is, if you're trained in economic thought the way I am, that's a crazy distinction. All businesses are essential. So it's better because the mass mandates are going away. People are a little freer to move about. We've still got vaccine mandates that are lurking out there, and Biden's threatening to I think the number I've heard, which may be exaggerated, was that he could lose almost 25% of the military because of these people do not want to get the vaccine, which seems pretty rational in the face that there seems to be some evidence that the more people get vaccinated, the more likely they are to get the virus. I can't weigh in on that. As they say, I'm not a scientist, but I do know it doesn't feel like we've had a rebirth of freedom even slightly. And if this were you're from the UK, if this were a parliamentary system, I think we'd be seeing somebody else besides Biden as our leader. I mean, he's clearly, there's only, I think, like 76% of Democrats want to see Biden go. They do not want him to run for re-election again. The long knives are already out here. You've got governors like, unbelievably, you have governors like J.B. Pritzker, Gavin Newsom, who have respectively ruined Illinois and ruined California. They're burnishing their presidential credentials. So I'd say freedom, free debate, honest reporting from the media. No, it certainly hadn't gotten better, and I think it's probably gotten worse.
It's funny you bring up Gavin Newsom. The latest betting odds have Gavin Newsom as an 8-1 to win the 2024 nomination. And seeing as Joe Biden is allegedly still running, it's funny that there's so much money being bet on it. A final question for you, Bill, if I may. The tagline to your show, it's money, culture, politics, and human flourishing. Now, I love this. I think this is the element of human flourishing is such an important aspect of what people should be focusing on. So can I ask, what does it mean to you personally? And how do you see all of us, our role in encouraging people to make the endeavor of human flourishing a prime mover in their lives?
Well, when everything's become political, I think we've got to back up and ask ourselves, what is political? What does it mean? What's the goal? What's the goal of politics? And in my view, it's got to be human flourishing, and you've got to have a set of ideas that are based in reality. They work, they're moral, and they make people happy. They make people flourish. And whether you call our views traditional, conservative, whatever the label you want to give it, I think the market system, the constitutional limited government, and all the things that have made this country terrific, those are ideas that have been proven over time to create human flourishing, not only just here in the United States, but all over the world. And so the aim, in my view, for policy and for all our conversations is, does this lead to human flourishing? And I think the jury is in. The left doesn't have any answers with that regard. They seem desperately unhappy and want to make us unhappier. And our ideas work, and I think they lead to healthy, productive lives and families and strong civil community. And to me, that's the goal.
And happy warriors, of course. Bill Walton, thank you ever so much. Thank you for being here with us. Now, Could you just let our listeners know where they can tune into your show, please?
Sure. We're on our website, of course, thebillwaltonshow.com, but we're also on YouTube, Rumble, and all the major podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple. Also, we're on the CPAC Now channel every Monday night at 7 o'clock. Of course, you don't have to watch it then. You can tape it and watch it later. And I'm also appearing on Frank Gaffney's show on the Steve Bannon Network, where we talk about China and capital markets and where we go from here in terms of our relationships with China.
Thank you ever so much. You're listening to Liberty Nation Radio, heard across the Radio America network from our flagship station in the nation's capital, WWRC in Washington, D.C. Coming up, we're doubling down on our special Talking Liberty segment with Scott D. Cosenza discussing the plans afoot to remove Supreme Court justices through term limits. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Just when we thought Democrat dreams of court packing had been crushed under the weight of unpopular opinion, it seems that those congressional rapscallions are at it again with a new tactic: term limits for those with whom they disagree. Well, here to discuss the finer details and the ramifications is Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor, host of the excellent Uprising podcast, and constitutional attorney, some may say scholar, Mr. Scott D. Cosenza, Esquire. Welcome back, Scott.
No one's saying that, Mark. Thank you.
I'm saying that, Scott. I'm saying that. Therefore, someone's saying it.
Yeah, all right.
It's the truth. It is what it is. So, Scott, we've got obviously dreams of court packing. President Biden ordered a commission into looking how to reform the court, and this commission, their report said that court packing was a bad idea for obvious reasons. Obviously, it's always going to be tit for tat. But this new tactic that coming forward in the form of a bill, I believe, is to term limit certain justices. Now, my first question...
No. It will term limit all justices, not just some justices.
Let me clarify my question here a little bit, Scott. Am I right in thinking that if Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Stephen Breyer were still on the court, this would not be happening?
Well, it's certainly, yes, that's exactly right. And we know that because the sponsor of the bill, Hank Johnson, who is I think a South Carolina congressman, famous for discussing that the island of Guam might tip over if a significant quantity of American troops were stationed there. We know it because
a man of reason and science, certainly.
He has said that that's the reason for the legislation, essentially that they are displeased by the recent rulings of the Supreme Court. And if RBG and Justice Breyer were installed on the court, presumably he would not be so displeased. So he and the few Democrats who signed on to this legislation, that's the reason for it.
So how would this work then, Scott? What are the details?
Well, I don't know that it ever would work, Mark. I don't understand how it could pass the bar because the Constitution requires that each of the branches is set up by the Constitution. So what I mean by that is the Constitution sets up rules for the judiciary. It's Article 3 of the United States Constitution. Article 1 is the legislative. Article 2 is the executive, and Article 3 is the judiciary. If the executive and the legislature get together and decide they want to make changes to how the judiciary works, they can't do so if any of those changes includes what is a constitutional rule. The proper and the only way for that to happen is to amend the United States Constitution. So the Constitution says that justices will serve basically as long as they have good behavior. It means it's a life term, right? That's what we have for our Supreme Court justices. So if we're going to reduce that term length from life to something other than life, we need to amend the Constitution to do so. That's how I see it. Obviously, Mr. Johnson doesn't in his estimation, but
he thinks Guam will tip over.
Well,
So the question I think everybody's wondering is, if they know that this is, I mean, it does seem to me that you can't have one branch changing the rules for another branch of government because they don't like what that branch is doing. That seems to me a plain reading, somebody who's not a constitutional attorney, unlike yourself, who is, it seems a plain reading that it would be unconstitutional. So how do they hope to even sell this to any public that even in any small way supports the Constitution?
I think that it would be wrong for us to presume that they do hope to, that is the motivation behind it. Legislators put forth legislation for any number of reasons that may have nothing to do with that. I suspect that would probably be the case with this legislation. Perhaps it's just to, rally the troops for, on their own side in terms of getting support for them. They all have re-election campaigns they're running and will face voters in November. So that's probably the more likely the reason for the legislation.
It does make me wonder that regardless of political affiliation, the idea that you've got one political party vilifying a number of Supreme Court justices, and that is what's happening.
Let me interrupt you there, Mark.
Yeah.
I think I can tell where you're headed. And one interesting feature of the legislation is that how it works is that the President of the United States gets to perpetually appoint new justices. Okay, every 2 years they appoint a new justice, and then the most senior justice is then removed from the bench onto some senior status, which is not part of the regular order of the Supreme Court. That's what the legislation prescribes. Of course, the senior justice on the United States Supreme Court is Clarence Thomas. So if the law were to be enacted in any case and actually function as written, the first justice that would have to be removed from the court under it would be Justice Clarence Thomas. And of course, Biden would get another appointment to replace him. So it seems like it's designed with while it covers all justices, it seems like it's designed that in some fantasy land where it actually were enacted, it would accrue to the benefit of the left and Democrats rather than conservatives.
So speaking of senior justices, I think it's fair to ask that, is it a good idea to take out the older justices? I mean, take out as in remove from the court the older justices. I mean, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was hanging on for dear life towards the end there, so she could make political hay for Democrats. But isn't there something to be said for a justice once they get to a certain age to be rotated out?
I'm not going to go put on my jabot mark, but I will speak in defense of Justice Ginsburg. I don't think it was just as craven as to make hay for Democrats that she held on. I think she relished her position on the court. Sure. And wanted to perform it, and especially, for what some of these folks have at the towards the end of their careers is I think this was the case with Justice Ginsburg. She lost her husband, and her children were grown and out of the house and in their own careers, and that's what filled her life was her work on the court. She wanted to continue it. So the charge of sort of like justicing while having not a mind towards it, I don't think can be applied to her. Her body failed her, but not her mind. But we have had justices where their minds have failed them. Senior moments on the court are not unheard of. I don't know, maybe there just should be a straight age that we can all agree on for newly appointed justices. This wouldn't occur to, I think that anything that you do, and maybe even start a new rule 10 years out. So you say for the first justice appointed 10 years from today. So that way there's no basically charge of gaming the system for one party or political, argument over another.
But Scott, that would defeat the entire purpose.
Yeah, right.
These reforms for the court, wouldn't it?
But we do actually have a senior status in the federal judiciary, yes. And justices who retire have taken advantage of this, and other senior judges take advantage of this. And basically what it does is it allows them to judge occasionally. Occasionally there will be vacancies in the federal courts for any number of reasons, including retirements, deaths, change of professions for people. And there, so I think Justice Souter did this well into his retirement. May still they'll sit in regular circuit court hearings and sometimes even lower courts, basically just to pinch hit for a case or two. So this exists, this sort of senior status where justices and judges don't have their full calendar, but still aid in the administration of the courts by judging. They say what you will about any Supreme Court justice, whether you like their politics or not. Being a good appellate judge is a thing that we need in this country. We need a good appellate judge. It's just the mechanics of it. I'm talking about not the abortion or the gun control cases, Mark. I'm talking about the insurance brokerage cases that nobody ever reads about that are important to actually get through in terms of the business of determining our laws.
And the meat and gravy. They're the heavy caseload ones. Scott, one more question on this. So you say that these things can't happen. This bill probably couldn't go through without a constitutional amendment because it impacts one of the three branches of government. Are any of the parties likely to try and push for a constitutional amendment, given the precarious and partisan nature of Congress at the moment?
I don't see any talk about it. I actually thought I'd see some kind of talk about that regarding this abortion decision, but they seem to have given up the idea that they even could muster, support in some states for that, because nobody seems to be talking about it in any case. And I think that probably reflects where the country is, which is to say that there's not a broad and overwhelming support, which is what would be required politically to get it done. Those things don't exist.
Okay, now we'll be right back with Scott DeCosenza after this short break, where we discuss two of the nation's favorites, beer and Amazon. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And we're back talking liberty with legal affairs editor and host of the Uprising podcast, Scott D. Cosenza. Earlier in the show, we talked Democrat efforts to reshape the Supreme Court. But now, I want to move on to some law cases that have piqued both interest and outrage. Tell me, Scott, is it a bad day to be a beer drinker in New Jersey?
Well, it is bad to be a beer drinker in New Jersey because the restaurant owners who own liquor licenses and make money off of selling booze and food are on the attack. And instead of attacking breweries that sell food and drinks with better service, higher quality goods, and more delicious items, they are sicking the government on them. So they have used their power with the alcohol beverage control authorities in order to make the breweries have a really bad experience for their guests. So what they've done is they've tried to throttle them so that if anybody goes to basically consume or buy beer at a brewery, it's a bad experience. They're restricting them to single serving, single wrapped, de minimis food items. They have to take a full tour before they can buy beer. They can't sell non-alcoholic coffee or soda along. So, if you want to go to the brewery with somebody who doesn't want to actually consume alcohol, the state now discourages that in the form of the ABC ruling. And it's all designed, Mark, to crush their business and make it an inhospitable comparison to the restaurants and bars that own very expensive liquor licenses in New Jersey.
Well, so that appears to me to be the crux of the issue. So a liquor license in New Jersey can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not more. And
yeah,
they're limited.
$1 million liquor license is definitely not unheard of. And this is just so I realize that you may not even understand what this is. What is a liquor license? It's just we do have such things in the United Kingdom. All right. Well, I know that there are countries. I mean, it doesn't make any particular sense that there would be a fantastically high fee to basically extract money from the public's pocket, because of course the liquor license owners don't pay for the license. The customers do. Every bit of intoxicating liquor is sold at a massive markup in order to feed the states or the localities, liquor license along with the taxing authorities.
So there's roughly I think it's 120 to 140 breweries in the New Jersey area. Do they have any recourse against this list? And please, if you get a chance, audience, go and check out this list of horrendous and troublemaking regulations that have to be followed. And it does even mention, I believe, a single wrap cracker in the rulings. But is there any...
The entirety of the list is important, Mark, because it reveals how preposterous it is that this government agency is about, the health and safety and welfare of the citizens of New Jersey, when in fact, nothing could be further from the truth. Let's just talk about for a second the ban on the sales of non-alcoholic beverages. I mean, just that alone, you take somebody who drives to this place, right? And by the way, food does slow the absorption of alcohol. So if you wanted to encourage responsible consumption of alcohol,
provide a cheese board.
Yeah, exactly right. You wouldn't want to ban it. And you also wouldn't want to ban the ability for somebody to buy a soda or a coffee. It's just again, this is the agency that's protecting New Jerseyans, or is it?
Yeah, that's state and federal agencies often have their own agendas behind things. Now, Scott, very quickly, I just want to move on to Amazon, which is a home favorite of many people, but I believe that they are not quite as upfront with their customers about certain things as liberty lovers, freedom lovers would like. Scott, what's the deal?
We're talking about the Ring doorbell system and an admission by Amazon to Congress that they have turned over Ring doorbell audio and video recordings without telling or informing or with permission from the users. This is in response to police requests for quote unquote emergency data, meaning the police are saying we have an emergency and we want this information. Now, ordinarily police can get whatever they want if they have a search warrant signed by a judge, right, for the information. And this isn't covered by that. This is just Amazon police demanding Amazon give the private video and audio recordings that people have, and Amazon doing so. And it would be one thing if they did so and said, we thought it was important, and here, you, user of our service, this is a disclosure of who we disclosed it to, what they're going to do with it, and then there was some rule for the information that was disclosed. Now, even that, I would say, is not acceptable for a product that people have paid to install in their home and haven't agreed to, but they're not even offering that. They're just disclosing it in these instances. I think there's about a dozen of them, and not telling anyone. So the moral of the story and the good that we can do here, Mark, is that there are some security settings within the Amazon product sphere that encrypt people's information, that would disallow Amazon from even being able to access it, much less than provide that access to third parties. So anybody who runs that system should really consider their privacy options.
Surely there's a lawsuit waiting to happen here, though, Scott.
Well, there is, but who reads the pages and pages of minute text disclosure that Amazon puts forth with their Ring doorbell? I don't think probably any of the active users, and I think they said there were 10 million of those devices in use in the United States. I can't imagine, even accessing the user agreement to read is likely something that most people haven't done, much less actually complete reading it. So there may be some get out of jail free card for Amazon deep in that language, Mark. We'll obviously.
But surely the onerousness of the instructions and the details itself is cause for concern in terms of privacy. So
I haven't been paid to represent Amazon, but I will say this: it's a doorbell that captures video and audio for certain purposes. If those purposes are expanded upon by the company rather than the end user, that is a problem. But whether the licensing and use agreement authorizes some of that, I can tell you without question, I have not read that agreement, so I can't tell you.
So do you think Amazon, in response to this congressional disclosure and obviously the Associated Press coverage of it, do you think that they will endeavor to make the user details, the user ability to privatize their information, do you think they'll make that more apparent, or do you think it'll just be business as usual?
I wish I could tell you. I think the one thing that I've seen these people who are in favor of more protections for consumers on their data ask Amazon to do, the big ask, Mark, is for them to default to a higher level of privacy with the user selection. So rather than going in and having to say, I wish to preserve my data and not share it with the world and Amazon, that's the default position. So that we're all, the customers of Amazon are protected by default when they set up their cameras. And then if they wish to kind of have a more liberal data use policy with their local constabulary, they would have to opt into that. And so that's something that Amazon could do. And will they? Well, if more people are critical of it and aware of it, then I hope so.
Scott DeCosenza, thank you ever so much.
Cheers, Mark.
And that's just about all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. I want to extend my sincerest thanks to our guests, the amazing Mr. Bill Walton of The Bill Walton Show, and the superb Mr. Scott DeCosenza, host of the Uprising podcast. Thank you for being here. And of course, my thanks to you at home for tuning in and listening. You are appreciated. My parting shot for this week, I want to leave you to one of my favorite sayings from Marcus Aurelius and his meditations. It goes, quote, "Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is perspective, not a truth," end quote. Now that was written almost 2,000 years ago, and yet it is as true today as it was then. And it's a lesson that we can all take to heart, and one that may prove us a better understanding of those who are driven by anger and certitude, and ultimately allow us to forgive the same within ourselves. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
We're doing it for real, really real. Liberty Nation.
And Jeff Charles, contributor for LibertyNation.com.
I think we're starting to make an impact. Liberty style, fight for freedom.
tracking poll sponsored by Liberty Nation for Thursday.
Mentioned by Dan Bongino, Rasmussen, Jordan Peterson, and others.
I can do it again if you want me to.
Cited in Mark Levin's American Marxism.
I think we're starting to make a really big impact. Get noticed. We're doing it. Rock on. I'm gone.